Hey everybody, this is Jason Miller, Gettr CEO. I am here today in London with internationally famous, internationally renowned journalist Andy Ngo. Andy, it's so great to be here with you. Of course, you guys know him from his reporting of Antifa, covering domestic United States politics, covering things all over the world. Now with the post-millennial, one of the most exciting additions to the Gettr family that we've had, I think really ever since we launched the platform. Andy is someone who I've just recently gotten to know, but of course, like you, I followed his reporting. This guy is fearless, he is tough, but the thing I appreciate about Andy the most is his insight and his ability to peel back the layers of the onion and figure out really what's going on the scene. One of the most impressive journalists I've ever met, and actually I'm glad now that we get a chance to team up. So Andy, tell us what you're up to these days.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Jason. There's a lot of symbolism for where we are right now. We're in front of the Palace of Westminster, which is the heart of the British democracy. And how much more democratic is it that technology now allows journalists, citizen journalists, independent journalists to sort of bypass the traditional institutional gatekeeping of newspapers with this opportunity with Gettr. I'll be able to live stream directly to your phones or computers and mobile tablets to tell you about the news that I think is relevant and interesting. If you've been following my work, you know that I cover the far left, the violent extremists on the far left, and a number of other issues that are quite important. And I'm just so thankful for this opportunity, the growth that's been happening on Gettr, and the fact that it's an application that runs well and is easy to use. I'm really thankful to be joining this, and I'm excited to be building a new community on that platform and to be making this announcement here right outside Parliament.
So Andy, one of the things I wanted to ask you is how has journalism changed, whether it be technology, whether it be the way that people interact with each other, since you first started reporting? How is it different now, and how has your approach to journalism changed?
So I do have traditional newsroom experience in that in the past I was an editor for worked as one of the editors for a student newspaper at a university, and traditionally you would be on the ground, you may take pictures, you're taking notes, and then you go and write up a story. Social media now makes it so that you can actually do either live streaming of certain events or near real time. And you see, usually the reason why so much coverage of breaking news happens on social media is because you don't have to worry about the time difference of a writer getting back to your desk and writing it up, and this going through these multiple layers of the other writers looking at it and editors looking at it. With breaking news, you have to get it out ASAP, and it can be in the form of videos, photos, and the social media makes that so much makes that possible. At the same time, for me, it's for myself and others, there are a lot of risks as well when you do that type of coverage, because we've seen a number of attacks on conservative journalists in the United States. It doesn't get very much coverage. Of course, most people know about the various assaults that I've been subjected to, but there's been a number of others who have maybe smaller profiles, and you don't hear about what happens to them. And so it's a risky, it's a risk to take on. But
yeah, I'm worried about Meghan Markle coming and getting me here. I've talked so much smack about her that here we are in London that she's going to send one of her goons after me. But so hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah, let's hope. Yeah.
But I also want to ask you cancel culture and the censorship of center and center-right voices. We're currently where there's a big spat with the Babylon Bee is something that's the fact that we're in the middle of, we have all this conflict in Ukraine, and back in domestic U.S. politics, the only thing people are talking about is the Babylon Bee and cancel culture and things like that. How dangerous is this trend as you look around, not just the U.S. but the rest of the world?
Well, you can see that it can really sway the opinion of a population, like at the nationwide level. I'm going to pull out one of the most well-known examples that people will remember in 2020 was the big tech media censorship of the New York Post reporting on Hunter Biden. Ultimately, we don't know really if it could have swung states that voted differently. However, the fact that you had millions and millions of people unable to read it, unable to share it, in that decision making by those in these various big social media platforms, that was made for partisan reasons. That's dangerous, it's scary, it's disturbing to me. It's disturbing that it happened in the United States, and that the lessons from that, I don't think have not been learned. If anything, we'll see more of those type of those in Silicon Valley trying to sway elections more and influence things in a way that's not fair.
So we were talking earlier, we're both from the Pacific Northwest. I'm from Seattle, you're from Portland. I would give you talk smack about the Blazers, but of course Sonics got sold off, became the Oklahoma City Thunder. Both of us are from cold places where it rains all the time. How did you get this independent mindset, this independent journalism mindset, growing up in a place that's so left of center? I know for me, growing up in Seattle, my dad was a welder, so he's very much a fiscal conservative. Mom was more of a social conservative. And as soon as I got old enough, I moved the heck out of Seattle because I was just too far to the center for the people in Seattle. But how did you grow up with this kind of this independent spirit and wanting to resist or buck the trend, just have everything be far left growing up in Portland?
I think, I didn't, it was never my intention to be like a conservative journalist. When I went into journalism as a student, for me I was just interested in reporting out stories that I thought weren't being reported, either by my colleagues or other young peers in the industry. And so, in the Pacific Northwest back in 2016, 17, 18, that was the start of a lot of really violent mobilization from the far left, and it was the way it was covered in the establishment press and local papers was that this was a good thing, that it was good for these militants to organize and carry out acts of violence against Trump supporters because Trump is a fascist, and it's now the role of journalists to be partisan activists, essentially. And I wanted to present the other side, which is not my opinion, but videos showing what these militants are doing. So that's why I took to the social media platform in addition to doing the traditional writing, because with what journalists write, readers have to understand that they're writing how they interpret reality around them, and video makes it easier to establish kind of a sequence of events of what happened. So that's what I began doing a lot of video, putting that on social media, covering riots and violent protests and what these extremists were doing, things that weren't being covered in the print press. And
would you say that that's the main difference, where you think that many of the journalists today, what they're missing is the lack of video content for so many, that's a big differentiator, that they don't go and actually capture the imagery of what's going on. They maybe come in and get a little bit of perspective, but not enough, and essentially they paint an incomplete picture? Or would you have more criticisms of most mainstream media reporters who say are covering Antifa or other far left militant groups?
It's not so much in that they're not getting video or photo, it's that they're not getting a complete picture because they're staying, for safety reasons, many of them stay a block or two away from the action, right? And then what happens is then you don't see the acts of criminality and the arson that being carried out, let's say by Antifa or BLM violent extremists. And then if journalists do go inside, they get attacked. But the thing is now we don't have to rely on broadcast journalists who are with certain institutions or with certain publications. It's now anybody who has a mobile device, has the ability to become a citizen journalist. And it's really important that people exercise, that Americans exercise those rights, because it's protected and not let extremists of any political persuasion create this environment where you can't record and document things in public.
That's a great point. In fact, as we're talking here, just that this thing, the phone, has so changed. The smartphone has changed everything from reporting to decentralizing news distribution to allowing people to get their own content. That's why the fact that you're now able to, on Gettr, live stream, talk to people, and we'll have, I mentioned this last night when I was doing a sit down with Majid Nawaz, also in London, about the live translation feature. They'll be coming up, the live subtitles in a dozen or so different languages on live streaming very shortly. So people all over the world, even if they don't know English, will soon be able to see and hear exactly what you're doing. Give us, as we wrap up here, give us a sneak peek of what we can expect to see from you. Different trends that you're seeing, whether it's on the continent, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in the US, where you think the far left movement is going, any fun projects you might be working on. Kind of take the Gettr family behind the scenes into the life of Andy Ngo for, as we start doing these weekly broadcasts or so, what we can expect, what we think you're going to be talking about.
Well, my beat, as everyone knows, is Antifa, and as weather starts to improve, as various COVID-related restrictions are being eased and ended all around the world, you're going to see them activate even more. And
so you're saying that as we move into late spring and the summer, they'll be back. They'll be back in full force, and we're going to see them all over.
Well, they've been back already, particularly in France. They've been mobilizing to a lot of really violent direct actions in response to one of the conservative presidential candidates, Eric Zemmour. The French presidential elections is coming up. American midterm elections are coming up. And this is an issue that the lessons that I think the public should have learned from, and lawmakers and legislators should have learned from 2020, a year long of campaign of violence and terrorism in the United States. I don't think the lessons were learned. And so you're seeing that most of those militants were not held accountable, were not prosecuted. And so
a lot of the troublemakers, even from Trump's first inauguration, they dropped a bunch of those prosecutions, which, don't get me started. I talked to one of the U.S. attorneys who was involved in that, and she was pulling her hair out. No, that's a good point. A lot of these folks are still out on the street and causing some real trouble.
Yes.
Andy, thank you.
Thank you
so glad to have you on Gettr, the platform.
Thank you.
And folks, stay here. Andy Ngo's page, his feed on Gettr. You're going to be seeing and hearing a lot of Andy. This is so cool. He's already an international superstar. So, I'm surprised people aren't coming up and asking for his autograph right now. Doing very, very important work. You're going to see Andy again. You're going to see him in France. You'll see him in Germany. You'll see him in the UK. You'll see him in the US. He's all over the place. You never know where he's going to pop up. But when he does, and when he starts live streaming, you got to tune in, because nobody is sharper and has better insight than Andy Ngo. So thanks, everyone. Hope to see you soon.